Okay, there we go. I'm just going to share the agenda. Oop, sharing a lot of things. Or do you just do the agenda?
Yeah, the agenda.
Okay, good. Okay. All right, I guess I'll get things started. So this is the Planning Board Subcommittee of August 25th, just after 2 o'clock. This meeting is being recorded by video and audio in accordance with the state open meeting law pursuant to section 20 of chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021. This meeting will be conducted by remote participation. Additionally, all votes taken by the Planning Board Subcommittee during this and future remote meetings will be by roll call vote. If there is a public comment period, or if you're calling in on a phone, you can press *9 to request to speak. If you're watching on a computer device, there's a raise hand button that you can tap or press to request to speak. I will stop sharing. And present, we have Subcommittee Chair Jane Remsen, Member Sean Henry, and Member Beverly Bookin, Subcommittee of the Planning Board. So on the agenda, I thought, and I apologize for not meeting last week. That week somehow just got away from us. We've been scheduling a lot of stuff to go on this fall with not only the Planning Board, but other boards and commissions. So when we last left off, we were talking about kind of wrapping up the discussion around the 1, 2, and 3 family potential changes to the zoning ordinance relating to both use, particularly with 2 family and to a limited degree 3 family allowance, and then also the dimensional requirements for both those uses as well. So that's kind of what we have up first, and then we can kind of close out with a little bit of a kind of follow up from where we left off with our meeting with Judy the last time we met with the draft Gloucester Station Overlay District that she had circulated and we discussed. And I think there's a little bit of a decision tree there to give guidance back to her as to where the board would like to go with that. So I distributed a very drafty, and I expect comment, particularly probably from Jane, memo that if we get to the point where the subcommittee is ready to start to have a broader discussion with the full board on the 1, 2, and 3 family proposals, this could be the kind of framework to advance forward. It doesn't have to be my name either. It could come from the subcommittee kind of endorsing a memo to the full planning board. But as we've been discussing, you know, there's kind of 2 areas of potential change that could result in easing the permitting for 1 and 2 family, and also 3 family in certain districts. As we found in the housing production plan, there's not really a limit on housing need in terms of type and affordability. And we worked obviously through the last year dealing with some of the provisions relating to affordability. And so we're back to discussions about things that might promote housing development. And so the first page just kind of outlines things, and then I just wanted to kind of show exactly what we are talking about. So this is the existing use table for residential uses, and as was pointed out pretty early on, we treat some of the same uses differently in the same district, which is not a typical approach. You're either allowed to do something or you're not allowed to do something. So one of the first kind of simple changes is to consolidate the way in which we permit 2 family, and by really kind of distilling down what's currently in 3 different forms of use to 2. One saying that you can convert from a single family to a 2 family in every district, and then that you can also have a new 2 family in any of the residential districts. And the only kind of real change, the couple of highlighted changes are, you'll find that new 2 family, as we discussed, and this is obviously for the board to kind of, you know, think about this and ultimately make a recommendation. You currently can't do a 2 family in the RC40. and it's also a special permit in neighborhood business. And we kind of went across the board in terms of allowing new two-family in all of the residential districts, and then also neighborhood business. And again, the rationale for neighborhood business is it follows the dimensional requirements of the adjacent residential district. And we have situations where there may be a structure that was used as a commercial use and may be converted to a single or a two, in which case it will be allowed, and I just have to follow the dimensional requirements for that adjacent residential district.
Hey, Greg, let's pause there because I think we beat this horse pretty much to death on the two-family, and I'm fine with going forward with this recommendation if Beverly and Sean are.
Okay, so then we'll close out at the very end, but I'll just keep moving along.
Beverly and Sean, are you good with that?
Yeah.
That table. Okay, great.
And the only other thing from a kind of as this appears in the zoning ordinance, obviously there's a number of residential uses that follow in the table, and sometimes you try to create the path of least resistance. A prior path was to break out use 5 into an A and B so that you wouldn't upset the apple cart in terms of numbering. So now we can actually undo that, and so uses number 5A and 5B will be renumbered as 4 and 5 in the table. So we'll have just a nice sequential order in the residential use table. Then staying on the use discussion, the other proposal that kind of came out of the discussion with Judy and also the housing production plan working group, and we've talked about it at the planning board level, is the permitting of three-family. So the table on the top again is an excerpt from the existing section 2.3.1 residential uses, use number 6, which is three-family dwellings or apartment dwellings, 3 units. And so currently not permitted in the larger lot districts, and those areas that it's allowed, it's either a city council special permit in R30 and then R20, 10, 5 are all special permits by the zoning board of appeals. And that was even a change a few years back. It used to always be city council that administered three-family special permits. And so there were those changes to the zoning board being the permit granting authority for the R2, R20, 10, and 5. And so the proposal here, again, is a little bit more of a kind of a ratcheting and easing in particular in the R30, putting that allowance with the zoning board of appeals, denoted by the SP under R30. And then in R20 and R10 as of right. So that would just be denoted by the yes. And then retaining the special permit in the R5, and that I think was also kind of still to the kind of Judy's, I mean, this was coming also from, discussion with Judy about how in the R5 district, there may be other issues of parking and nonconformity that typically would have these things fall into a special permitting process in one way or another, or a variance or relief process. And so to consolidate that review, as you'll see kind of later on, there is some relaxation of dimensional standard, but the recommendation was to retain that as a special permit with the Board of Appeals.
So pausing there.
Yep.
I'm fine with R30 being a special permit. I'm not fine with R20 being an as of right, but I would be okay with it as a special permit. And I am fine with R10 being as of right. And I'm actually okay with R5 being as of right, because if it is a nonconformity, it would automatically drive to the ZBA anyway. But what do Sean and Beverly think about that?
Well, I have mixed feelings. I think an R20 is a pretty big site. And so a 3 by right to me doesn't seem over the top. I mean, I understand you see it as a, I'm looking at it here. Yeah, but you have it at, it is a special, oh, you wanted R10 to be a special permit, right?
Do I?
No, R20, I'm sorry, I'm
R20.
reading it wrong, okay.
Yeah, but
I think in
R20 is,
R20
it's 1 acre, right? How many acres is R20?
No, it's a half acre.
I mean, sorry, half acre, right?
Okay, I think it's more than adequate for a threeplex without a review. But I take it on advisement. I happen to agree with you in an R5. I think an R5 is where that kind of density is supposed to be. And so I'd be willing to do a trade-off for yes there, and if you want to, if Sean agrees to special in the R10, okay, but
R20.
I don't know. R20, I'm sorry. I just keep reading this wrong.
I mean, I'll go back and I'll put the words in your mouth, Beverly. You know, as we left this last discussion, it was, you know, this is, you know, your typical single and two family districts that are now being asked to kind of take on more, you know, more density, and in the form of three families. So, you know, there's one argument that we say R20, there's plenty of room. Then what are we saying about R10? So, you know, which way you want to go with the potential need for a special permit. You know, again, right now it's a special permit with the Board of Appeals. So it's a question of whether or not, you know, some of the things that have been done dimensionally have streamlined it. I don't know that there's really been a lot of permitting activity for three family in those districts in particular. We do see a lot in the R5 district currently. So it's a matter of, you know, if you're really trying to say go ahead, you know, then it's the as of right approach with the dimensional requirements and standards that are now kind of pushing it to, you don't need additional lot area if you have a lot that complies with the 1 or 2 family district. You know, you could propose a 3. So it's you know, it's a significant change. So it's, you know, it's obviously worth, you know, weighing what, you know, what you think about how this would progress.
Sean, what do you think?
I agree with both of you on all the 3 yeses now. I think those are fine. I think I would actually tend to go yes on an R30 if we did some additional footprint restrictions like we talked about before, so that you know, I think it's both Greg and Judy said last time that people get excited about the capacity, but in the end it's really what it looks like. And so if we included footprint restrictions so that a 3 family didn't look like 3 single family dwellings stacked next to each other, I think they would fit in the neighborhood much more easily. But if you are set on the special permit, I'm fine with that as well, moving forward with that as well.
The thing is about, it gets complicated to talk about the building form, because a triplex could just as easily be 3 townhouses, or it could be a threeplex.
Right.
And so 3,
Or
I
for-
mean, you
if
walk
we're
through a
looking-
neighborhood and you see a threeplex, you know there are 3 units there. I mean,
Yeah.
pretty much. And if you see townhouses, you definitely know. So, I mean, I don't think that the form of the construction is going to be as discriminating as you might think it would be.
Or be
So-
limited by the footprint. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only, and as we discussed this the last time, I mean, the things that you can do are, you know, dimensional setback, you know, front, side, rear, size of lot, height, and then the other one that we have that is quite variable from community to community, and it definitely deals with the size of the structure, is the lot coverage of all.
Lot coverage, yeah.
So, you know, and you know, it's, I brought this up, I think also it's something that David has brought up before in discussion about, kind of predicting what might happen, or, looking at, what has occurred with some tear down rebuild and that type of thing. And you may have a structure from 1940 or 1960. It's a 1,600 square foot house, with an 800 or 1,000 square foot foundation with a smaller second story. And then, you look at the dimensional tables in an R10, you can put in a 2,500 square foot foundation, 2.5 story. You're tripling the size of the structure, at least from a floor area perspective. So again, those are some of the things that could potentially have an impact if you were to, some communities range anywhere from 10 to 25 to 35% lot coverage for structure. And we currently, if I scroll down, we're currently at 25% until you get into the smaller districts. It actually goes up. So I misspoke. In R10, you could have a 3,000 square foot footprint.
As an aside, that's another thing we need to do is a demolition delay. I don't know if that's planning board or somebody else.
For what reason?
Because there's no, Greg was just talking about historic structures. There's no
Oh, I see.
opportunity for anyone to get together, to neighborhoods to form a group, or if it's a city to buy it, or the historic commission to look at it. Right now, someone can just tear a house down right away. A historic house.
Yeah, but to
well-
go back, it's not a historic house unless it's technically,
Yeah,
unless
no,
it's
I
been
know.
designated as
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
So,
I don't wanna-
yeah,
I don't want to go, I don't want to distract too much. But anyway, I think it should read SPSPYY myself.
Well, the only reason I would go with that is that there's as I say, I rather see a Y in the R5, and the trade-off is for R20, right? And I think there in the R30 and the R4 and the R20, there people do, the whole point of the special permit is that then the developer gets to show the development plan. And that's where you kind of look at the density issues. But on the other hand, if it meets all of the dimensional requirements, then there isn't any grounds to turn it down. So what's the point of the special review? But
I think it's a chance for neighborhoods to share in the process, even if the outcome is going to be the same, that people have the opportunity to find out what's going on and voice their objections. And
I think, again, my big issue with how special permits are currently perceived is that
I
they're,
can't hear you, Sean.
sorry, am I muted?
Nope, you're just soft.
Oh,
It's just
let me,
soft spoken, Sean.
let me try to figure out what's going on. I
No,
apologize.
you're fine. Just speak up.
Anyway, can you hear me now? Is it better?
Yep.
I don't know which microphone I'm talking to. My problem with the special permit designation in general is not the way they're supposed to work, but the way they're perceived in Gloucester currently. And the perception is that they are somehow exist outside of our zoning and are not actually part of the zoning, but a method for developers or property owners to circumvent zoning and get something they're not actually allowed, when in actuality, special permit is there to allow something, not to disallow it. And I think we've seen that historically with the Espressos project. I think we've seen that with the special permit issued out in West Gloucester for the Kerrigan project, where simply because it says SP, it's somehow viewed within our city and some among the city council, current city council, that it is not actually part of zoning, but a circumnavigation of zoning requirements. The whole zone for 3 business, when in actuality, if you peruse the existing zoning ordinance, that those 9 units were completely acceptable there. So that's my hesitation to continue restricting everything but major projects or relatively major projects to a special permit, because I think the process is misunderstood, and it makes the permitting of those projects much more time consuming and costly simply because they're called a special permit.
Okay, how about this? How about Greg, how about you make it a Y with a question mark in parentheses? And we take it to the larger board, and I'll talk about why I think it needs to be an SP, and Sean can talk about why he thinks it needs to be a Y. And do you know what I mean? Is that okay?
How about I make it yellow or orange?
Yeah, make it a little
Okay.
darker than yellow. Yellow's hard to read.
Yeah,
I just want
true.
to comment on what Sean said. I see the opposite. I see the special permit process as giving neighbors a sense that they can overturn something when they really can't, because they come and object and we say, yes, but it meets all of the development standards.
Oh,
And
I think that's
therefore-
what Sean's kind of saying, actually.
Yeah, and well, but I don't see that. I mean, I don't see developers using this process to get something more than there. If they're, it's that it gives neighbors a false sense of and it either is literally something that they can influence or it's not. So I rather work on the development standards and have those really tight and make it reasonable for the maximum size threeplex in the whatever zone, 20 R20 R10, than to put it up to special permit. But I that's fine. We can take it to the bigger board and see what the rest say.
So I'm gonna make the proposals that you agree on in green,
Yes.
and red needing further discussion, and I'll note that as well. I
Right.
also want to recognize, so we have two attendees, Chris McCarthy and Bill Wheat, and Chris has his hand raised, so I don't.
Okay,
know-
Greg, before you do that, could you
Yep.
just tell us what footnotes 4 and 8 are? And also, as we're presenting this, I think we should probably put those in the writing below.
Okay. I can do that. Yep.
I'm looking for 4 and 8. Where are they?
So I did a lot of excerpting here.
Oh.
I also,
I see, I see.
It didn't include like, the commercial and industrial districts in some of the tables, but I'll let you know. Let me just
Okay.
Stop
I
sharing
see
for
the
1
plan.
second. And-
I looked it up on what I thought I had, and the footnotes are all in letters, not numbers, so I'm confused.
I can get right to it. 1 second. So number 4 is only specific to the CV and the VB district, so it doesn't really apply to any of these changes.
Okay,
And number 8 as well, special permit standards apply without regard for section 2.4.4A through 2.2.4B for dimensional standard C 3.2.1. So it's a cross reference, and I can jump there as well, which deals with non-conforming structures, plots, and uses.
okay.
Yeah, so
So-
that's it's for non-conforming lots.
So it's saying that even if it has a yes, if it's non-conforming, it still has to go to the ZBA.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, good. Great. I'm happy to have you recognize speakers.
And I can also, I can put those just for clarity, so nobody says, hey, what's that?
It's a good idea.
And if you wanted to, I can recognize Chris. And
Yep.
let him chime in. Okay, Chris, you should be able to speak.
He's muted.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Thank you very much. Wondering, Greg, if you could put the last chart back up?
Yep.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm glad that you guys are taking on this stuff, especially with the abilities from one single families to be able to, by matter of right, convert to a 2-family without a special permit. I think when you're allowed to do it with a new structure and you couldn't do it to an existing house. I thought it was a little bit unfair. So I'm glad that you're making those changes. The only, I think in the part that you covered last, the conversion from a single to a 3, which is what you'd get a lot of, I think. And the only concern I have is Mr. Red there in the R20 district. Building in a lot of those places, a lot of them are single families, and the ability for someone to go from a single family to a 3 family by matter of right, I think is a little bit, I think from at least my standpoint, sort of seeing over, for example, on Coffin's Beach, many people could have put 2 families there and they just want to keep them as single, and you'll get some developers like myself that'll go in there and look at something and say, I'm going to put a triplex. I'm going to tear down an existing house, increase the septic and put a 3-plex. And I think that would change not only there, but on other places along Washington Street. It'll change a lot of the character. And I think that it's important in those districts where there's so many of them that were, converted from 10,000 square feet to 20,000 requirements 20 years ago. I think that that'd be kind of drastic to go to a 3 unit by matter of right for someone that has a large lot. I just think it'll change a lot of the landscape in those areas. And so I look at it as being a little bit too drastic, that's all. And those are some of my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I totally agree with you.
I think it should be special permit. That's what I think it should be at the very.
It is currently special permit. So keeping it special permit would be a no change situation. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
So we want to stick where we are.
I think we're good.
Okay. So the other 2 areas that are now starting to get into dimensions. And again, I put on the top of this page, this is the table for 1, 2, and 3 family dwellings, and accessory uses are omitted just for display purposes. So again, we know currently that when you kind of get to the R30 district, that's where things kind of flip and require additional lot area for a 2 family. That was one of the things that we talked a lot about in terms of allowance for 2 family on these larger lots, rather than, in some districts in the real extreme requiring 2 acres for a 2 family, 4 acres for a 2 family in the R80 district. And also pointed out that, from a lot division perspective, again, we have all of the dimensional standards of front, side, and rear, which kind of keep the separation from structure to structure in the neighborhood. But yet we have this additional requirement that in a lot of ways hinders lot division, with having a difference in the requirement for lot width versus lot frontage, where the structure actually would be sited on the lot. There's this increased allowance, which kind of creates these kind of vase-shaped lots, or, basically leaving the frontage of a lot has to kind of expand out to meet another dimensional requirement.
Can I just go back?
Yep.
So the point is, in the R80, R40, R30, and R30, you have to have double the site area. Is that correct?
Correct.
Whereas once you get into the R20, it's 10, meaning you can put 2 on 20.
Yep.
On R10, technically 5 on 10. So the point is it's the break point is between R30 and R20.
20. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. It's kind of, the way it's done is kind of awkward, because if it's only a 2-plex, we could have said 160, 80, and 60.
Yep.
Instead of this way. You read it, you have to really think, what does that mean? So it's a little
Right.
awkward, but nevertheless, we're changing it. So it doesn't matter.
Yep. And so, so there's a couple of moving parts in this table. So the first is, and I think we might be able to do a better job of defining what we're talking about. So again, no change to minimum lot area. So if you're looking to do most anything in the residential districts, those are the current requirements: 80, 40, 40 in RC, 40, 30, 20, 10, 5. And then this is dealing with that issue of, what's the lot area requirement for a 2-family or potentially a 3-family. So that's the other, kind of leads back to the discussion that we just had about 3-family. The recommendation was to, basically, it's not about lot area, it's about use and allowance, in which case there is no additional lot area requirement for anything. So this is the lot area requirement for in excess of 2. Again, the language I'm not totally wedded to. I think we can work on that a little bit further, but basically indicating that for a 1 or 2 family or 3-family in these districts, there's no additional lot area requirement. And then Judy had suggested in the R5 that there actually be an additional lot area requirement for a 3-family. So I'll stop at that one before we get into dimensions.
Yeah, so just a comment there. Footnote A says this requirement pertains to 2-family dwellings only. So you would have to take that out, right?
So there's the footnote A, which now says for multifamily dwellings of 4 or more, see section 3.2. So it pushes them to the other table.
Right. And it also says 2-family dwellings must also satisfy the general minimum lot area requirement. So I'm actually quite confused.
So you want me to get the existing?
Right, so are we keeping
language?
footnote A?
We're changing it. We're basically making sure that for multi-family dwellings, people are going to go to the other
Okay.
table.
I
But
see.
if that's the case in the table, why you say in excess of 2? Why don't you
Yeah.
say up to
So-
3 or something?
Yeah, so it could be that minimum lot area, for the first heading could be changed for 1 and 2 family. And then the
Oh, but-
second line would be lot area, additional lot area for 3-family. Again, it kind of all goes back.
Gotcha.
It
Okay.
also goes back to the question about whether you think that there should be additional lot area in the R5.
And I mean, I think what you just said is right, that you make the minimum lot fair for 1 or 2, and that the minimum additional is in excess of 2, which of course, in this case is only a third, because footnote
Because-
A then refers you to anything above that. So what would happen would be that in an R5, in order to build 3 units, you'd have to have a 6,000 square foot lot.
Right.
And that is reasonable, I think. That's one unit per 2,000 square feet. That's pretty reasonable for an R5.
How did you arrive at 6?
Because you got 5, if I'm gonna do 3, I've got to add 1,000 to 5,000. The minimum lot size is 5,000 for up to 2 units. If you
Oh,
add, you see 6?
yes,
Yeah.
okay.
See, so what happens is, what you're saying is 2 in 5,000 is 1 lot, is 1 unit per 2,500. 3 is 1, and in a 5,000 square foot lot is what, about 1,700. This makes it, by adding the 1,000, means that if you want to build 3, you need a 6,000 square foot lot, and then it would be 1 unit per 2,000, and that's just more reasonable for from the density standpoint, I think. Do you see my math that I was
Yep,
doing?
yep, I
Okay.
do.
And so just to kind of piggyback on the discussion from the use perspective, the other thing that you could do is you could apply some similar standard for a 3-family in those other districts that you're kind of going back and forth on whether it's allowed as right or by special permit.
So where I made a mistake was, Greg, can you highlight the word additional as red? Because you added that word from the previous
Oh, okay.
table. So I thought we had not reading it carefully. I thought we were, I didn't know what we were doing. Thought it looked
Okay.
a little weird.
Got it.
There you go. Okay.
Okay, so basically that means even though you've written 0 in this line, in the R80 to R10, there's really no change. Well, no, there is a little bit of a change to the table.
There's quite a bit of change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no,
Yeah,
because
so
we're
this-
saying minimum lot area per dwelling is still 80,000 in our R80, still 40,000 in R40, still 30,000 in R30. But
But
now,
previously that was for one unit in the one housing unit in each
no,
of the.
per dwelling unit. Right, so it made it, so it could only be one, right?
Right. It
Right
used to be, the
before,
table used to address the lot area, the minimum lot area, and then the lot area per dwelling unit. So that dealt with the, if you were to do 2 units, you would have to
Right,
basically, so that was her point of saying, let's make it clear that we're talking about additional lot area.
right.
And so this is suggesting for 1 and 2 family, there's no requirement, and then for 3 family.
Beverly was way ahead of me. Now I get it. Okay.
no,
so
that's okay. That's
it was
okay.
still, so now we're still saying you can have 2 family in the R20, and depending on what we say about special permit or as of right, you can do 3 family in the R20.
Yeah, excuse me,
then-
I have to go rescue a cat who's hanging off of a screen here. It's definitely saying I'm ready to come in. All right, down you go. I'll come get you.
And we're saying we can do 2 or 3 family. Right. Yeah, I get it. I think.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm okay with that line.
Okay. And then this is other, another change, again, in the prior table, the lot width was something greater than the frontage requirement. And this is basically kind of bringing them into agreement, so that if you have 80 feet of frontage and you carry that width back, you don't have to have increased lot width where you site a home.
And why do they need to be in agreement?
This was just a point of saying, another thing that could be done to kind of ease, lot creation and infill. Because right now, if you had that 65 feet of frontage or 80 feet of frontage, and that's what you could say you had 160 feet of frontage and you could divide something in half if you have ample lot area. Once you get to start to siting where the homes are, you would have a requirement for 100 feet of lot width. So it makes it very challenging to take a rectangle and divide it into 2 smaller rectangles.
Right.
You have to add a lot of angles to try to create that lot width, satisfy that lot width where you site a home.
So what's the point of even having that line then?
Which line?
The line
The
of
lot-
minimum lot width? Because if your minimum frontage is already, where do you measure lot width?
You measure lot width where you site the house. So then, like, for instance, after you site a house, it can fall to, to
I see.
a narrower
I
lot.
see.
But
Okay.
you have to kind of carry a certain amount of that width of the frontage to where you site the home.
Okay. I'm fine with that. Everybody else, okay?
Yes.
And I'm noting that Chris has raised his hand again, if
Okay.
you want to let him speak.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. Just a quick comment, it's sort of as a layperson, it's hard to understand all the zeros and the 1,000, but that's might just be me and my dyslexia. But it sounds like that's heading in the right direction. With regards to the lot width, I think that was probably created when they were trying to make a lot of cul-de-sacs where they want houses to be sort of equal distance and away from a certain street circle, the end of a cul-de-sac. That's my only guess is why they did the minimum lot width. I think that this would improve a lot of the streetscapes going down to the lot lot frontage carrying that back to the lot width, as long as you have the sidelines are met. I've done some projects where I've had to zigzag to be able to put houses in, and seen some other ones where you sometimes have to create houses in back of other houses, like there is over on Concord Street. And I hate to say, well, a project I did over on Essex Ave, where you've had to stagger the houses and actually turn the houses gable into the street because it got pinched with the lot width requirement. So I think it'll be a good idea to bring the lot frontage right back to where the width is, as long as they meet the sideline setbacks. I think that's a good change, Greg, and
Yep.
subcommittee. Thank you. All set.
Okay.
Okay,
Are you good with those two lines, Beverly?
yeah, that's good.
Okay.
I
So
didn't
moving-
quite follow the conversation because I would have to see his point, but I think that since he has some experience in this, there's no reason that the lot width and the frontage can't be the same.
Yeah.
Now, what happens in the case of a pork chop lot?
So, in a pork chop lot, there's still that requirement of in any district that they're allowed in, the minimum required frontage is 40 feet. The maximum of that, the bone or the of the lot can be 250 feet, and then you still need twice the lot area for the district in that case. So in this case, if, for instance, that doesn't really change a whole lot here, except that a two-family wouldn't need additional lot area.
All right, well, I'll leave it. If you're comfortable, that's fine. I'm just having trouble visualizing it, but it's fine.
So basically it still requires twice the lot area for the district, which would be that first line, that minimum lot area. So it really doesn't change it. Yeah. We
Great.
can dive into pork chop lot at some point as well.
Yeah,
No, not now.
Not today.
we call them flag lots, by the way,
Yes,
in Oregon,
yes.
so that you can talk about the pole,
Yes.
the pole and the flag.
So with that, the last thing that we left kind of the discussion with was around building height. And we have a little bit more data on that as well, with some example of the 35 feet and what that impact would be like, the number of times, that's been requested, how often it's usually granted. And I kind of just highlighted this coverage requirement again, just back to Sean's point that he raised earlier about, whether or not again, if there is a concern that is too liberal, in that you're seeing infill structures that are too large, that's the place that you would address the footprint of a structure. They range, they range dramatically from town to town, depending, but also depending probably also on what their lot sizes are. There's many communities in the area that have 1 acre and 2 acre zoning, and they have like a 10% or 15% lot coverage requirement,
Which is ridiculous.
because they have
yes.
such a large lot to begin with. But that could be utilized in, again, it's either I have a larger lot, I don't care about the size of the structure. In tighter knit neighborhoods, a larger structure is what starts to change the character of a neighborhood, and that could be addressed by coverage. So the 35 feet, I think Gemma has a couple of things that she can, I'm going to stop sharing. She did some analysis of digging back into zoning board decisions to figure out how often. I think, the last 3 years might be a little bit anomalous. I can certainly recall a number of other examples of height being requested between 30 and 35 feet. But this is, I'll let her speak to what she found.
Wait, hang on. Are these places that requested and received, or just?
So they're requested, received, or there's a couple that were withdrawn. So she can tell you what that is all about.
So I'll just preface by saying that this was much more, this is not, pulling data out of an Excel spreadsheet where everything's there. This was much more of sort of an exploration, trying to track down instances of this and pull them together and get an idea of the numbers. So just keep that in mind. But this map shows from the beginning of 2019 to halfway through this year, 2021. And the red are actual decisions where height relief was given. And then these two black are instances. One was it was never taken back up again, at least that I could find in the meeting minutes. And the other one, it was withdrawn without prejudice. So these are sort of the array of them, and the reds are what was granted height relief. So just two examples that I was able to either get a photo of or pull the Google photo. These are two of the points that are on that map. And this was the language from the minutes here. So this was going from, this guy here was going from a 2-story to a 4-story. So that's a pretty, significant change. And then this one here didn't provide as much information about the actual change in height, but basically they were converting to a 3-family use, and that was why they were doing the height increase. So this was sort of from the permits. The other thing we dove into a little bit is the AppGeo estimates of height from when they did a flyover. So again, with this, it was a little, the numbers are not perfect, but we kind of tried to pull some examples that made sense. So these 3 houses here, 2 of them are over and 1 of them is under. So this one here on Bass Ave is 35 feet. This one here is 33, and this one here is 22. And then just kind of another streetscape to, get a little variety. It's the same kind of thing. This one here is 29, 34.6, and 34.1. So hopefully those images just kind of give you guys a little bit of context as to what that height actually looks like on the ground. And I'll hand it off to you to continue your discussion.
Could you just go back to highlight it's slide number 2? So slightly off topic now, but going back to my idea of 3-family by right in both R20 and R30, is that I think if crafted the language correctly, you could have very much something like that home on the right, which is currently a 3-family home, and I think is largely indistinguishable from any single-family home we have in town. And
You mean the one on the left?
The one on the left, yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah. The other one's a duplex, right?
Right. The one on the right I walk by every morning. That's down on the fort behind the hotel. But anyway, the one on the left, yes, I think it is a moderately sized home providing 3 moderately sized, most likely small A affordable units, which would go a long way to addressing some of our needs. And I wouldn't think that would look out of place in basically any neighborhood in the city. So, anyway.
I would like to point out, Greg, do you have a zoning map available with the districts? That R20
Hello?
is basically,
Take this call. I'm in a meeting.
wait,
I'll call you back.
that R20 is almost the whole coastline of Gloucester, with the exception of a little bit of R10. And I think that changing the height from, right, exactly. And look, and yeah, to the, all around the river, basically, and yeah. And I think changing from R30 to R35 in
You mean height, you
areas,
mean height.
height from 30 to 35 feet, in areas where everyone is freaking out about their views at all times, even when nobody's building anything. They're freaking out about trees, they're freaking out about, they're just freaking out about it all the time. Putting up your garage, blah, 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 blah. I think it would be really, really controversial and not a great idea.
But I think the counterpoint to that is I think you make an excellent point talking about this area rings, R20 rings the water. And then that's the area that sooner than later, the city is going to have to grapple with the issue of rising water, right? And how to address that. I think you're going to
That
see
is true.
far more new structures that are doing garage under, 2 floors on top. And unless we want to see a lot of 30-foot flat roofed buildings to do that, then I think increasing the allowance to 35 makes a lot of sense at this point.
Gemma, do you? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, at this point especially, because I think if we task the planning folks to look back and find out how many of the height exemption requests have been because people were putting their homes up on piers, trying to keep out from the new floodplain, I think a lot in the R20 would be a result of that.
Yeah, Gemma, that's what I was going to ask you. Do you know if the one on Atlantic Ave was because of that?
So I'm not sure exactly which one it was, but I know that at least one of them was specifically talking about siting related to flooding.
Mm-hmm.
I think the one that was on Washington Street across from the UMass station.
Yes. Colburn.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think that was specifically for that, but I think
You're
my
right. It
recollection
was
is
a conflict with FEMA. Yep.
So I can tell you that, we are also working with MAPC on a project with the town of Winthrop, looking at our floodplain zoning, which isn't entirely off topic, but I would agree there's two things to this. One, just for context, Essex, Manchester, Hamilton, Wenham, Beverly, and Topfield all have a 35-foot height limitation for 1 and 2 family. Rockport has 30, Gloucester has 30. And so just in terms of, as you're, and again, we probably will find examples that most of those homes that Gemma brought up were probably pre-1960, where, and I'd have to go look exactly, what height restrictions were in place at the time, and whether or not it's been kind of a ratcheting down over time. But I would agree that, as right now, that would basically, I suppose, buy, a number of areas, 5 feet for allowance if they were to, progressively, try to comply with the floodplain construction standards. Once they start to put more than a 50% investment into a structure, they have to comply with the floodplain regulations and bring the base floor of a structure up to above the base flood elevation, in which case this may provide, a relief valve for that. If somebody's in a really extreme example, again, the height exception would still remain in place for over 35. But back to Jane's point as well, it's, I believe in the 90s, 80s and 90s, there was a lot of discussion about the height, and it went back and forth over who was going to review. And now we have this kind of odd situation where we have 30 to 35 with the zoning board and then 35 and above with the city council. So I don't doubt that height is a concern, but it also potentially has the positive impact, as you know, we've had some discussions about applications where, you know, because of the height restriction and somebody saying, okay, I'm just going to comply, it affects the architecture of the building as well. So, you know, there is the ability, you know, potentially to have more architectural interest and feature with roof lines and that type of thing with that 35-foot allowance. But if you don't say anything, there is the potential for a flat roof structure as well. And Jane's words, can't regulate taste. And if somebody chooses to do that, you know, that's what, you know, what could potentially be allowed.
Well, and that's why I want to ring in on this I'm with Sean on this one. First of all, 35 is just practically standard in every single family zone in almost any zoning code, not just in Massachusetts. It just is. And especially we have a definition of height that does not allow for, it's not very liberal. So it's the top of the roof, no matter what the shape of the roof is. And a roof this way has less impact than a roof than a mansard roof, for example. And so I think the difference between 30 and 35 is de minimis. I think in the scheme of things, it's de minimis. It really is. It's a fight over a few feet of height that if you were to stand the average citizen on a street front and ask them the height of a building, they would have very hard time telling. And so as a result, I think that the 35 is appropriate latitude to be granted, especially in these zones where we're allowing 3 flatters. And 3 flatters as a design style is very common in New England, and they tend to often end up flat roofed. And if, you know, I just think that extra 5 feet is in keeping with our idea about encouraging density and making it easier and making it situations where you don't have to get variances and go to special permits for 2 or 3 feet. I think that it's just in keeping with reducing regulations where you can, where they do not make a major impact.
The thing about a peaked roof is you could have a peaked roof horizontal to the view or the other way. You know what I mean? Like, so people.
Yeah,
could
no, I
see,
get you. I get you. Yeah, no, I get you. But for example, in some zoning codes, when you have a peaked roof, it takes into account and you get to reduce the height at the beam to half, because it accounts for the fact that there's open space on either side. I think it's called a hip roof. Is this called a hip roof? I always can't, I've never known what.
Oh, so it goes.
It goes like this, you know, it's a steeple. And so in many codes, the height is not the top of the roof line, the beam, it is halfway down. So we have the literal definition to highest point of the building, right? And so 35 in a roof that's this doesn't have the kind, you know, it has de minimis impact over 30 feet, in my opinion.
Well, right now we don't have a requirement for peaks. So are you saying?
Well, but our definition of building height though is from the highest point, is it not?
Yes.
Is it not? Right. So on a roof like this, it is the top. And so I just think it's a de minimis difference, and it's in the spirit of reducing unnecessary regulation.
How about requiring a peak then?
Don't know. We don't have design review. It's kind of difficult in this city. We don't have design review. So to have development standards that get into that kind of thing probably is problematic. Now, sometimes we have someone come to us in a special permit and we exercise design review status. We talk to them about how it looks and so on, because a special permit allows that. But our zone code has no formal design review, and no board to my knowledge is specifically charged with design review. So I think that's problematic, but Greg can speak to that.
Yeah, the only board that has that ability is the Historic District Commission. They have design guidelines and architectural review.
Yeah,
I can.
it doesn't apply to these buildings.
I can look into that standard because I think, you know, if there is, if you're moving towards a yes to an increased height, whether or not there are some parameters that could be put on that. Because again, right now you're stuck at 30. So now you're given this space. So if there's a trade-off and allowance for some designation of roof line, for instance, you know, maybe that's a compromise.
And, you know, as a little bit of a sidebar, but not really, does this bring up the larger issue that if you're in a FEMA flood zone, you should be allowed to have your height counted from base elevation? I mean,
I think
Well,
or wait,
that-
am I
that
using the
would
term
actually- yeah,
correctly?
you're
I don't
using-
know.
You're
but-
using the right term, but that actually could be much more dramatic than just increasing it to 35.
right. I think
There
people
are
would
some
think out more
where
about
it
that.
might be 8 to 10 feet.
But aren't
You know,
there
you
just gonna continue to be lawsuits over that?
Well, I mean, I guess, you know, and as we potentially address this through floodplain zoning, the other concern is you're getting over investment in really high risk areas. So
Mhm.
at some point, you know, either, you know, there isn't that, you know, it's a big issue because obviously the valuation of those properties is extremely high. It's a big portion of the residential tax base. And if those start to move towards lesser value, you know, there's an impact to that. So, you know, I think the most important thing is making sure that, you know, people are applying the safest design standard as they can. But it's very variable. In some instances, again, a 5-foot allowance for areas, you know, particularly along like the Annisquam River and other places like that. You know, that's a pretty good allowance to kind of adjust for some of that accommodation for building above that elevation. And then there are other places where, you know, in B zone areas that, you know, it could be 10 feet plus to comply, in which case that is a special case where things should be looked at a little bit closer than just saying, you know, you can build a structure that might be, you know, 40 feet on one side and less on the other, with pile support.
I don't know how many of you have been to the south where there are really high storm surges from hurricanes and such, but buildings are often, the first floor is elevated a story above. And what's underneath is garages and non-habitable spaces are allowed with what they're called breakout walls, so that if there is a storm surge that comes through, it'll, you know, take out those walls, but not take down the house. And I have to tell you, it's not a very attractive building style to have this house. Literally, the front door is up in the second story with stairwells. And it's not an attractive building. You know, to raise your house 2 or 3 or 4 feet, which are within the 30 to 35 would give you up to 5 feet. 12 feet. It's not a pretty building standard, and not a pretty outcome in terms of how these houses look.
In
I
the
wouldn't
Central
live in
Valley-
one.
In the Central Valley outside of California and some of the farmland that has floods repeatedly, you can pass a farm field where the farmhouse has been raised on a 12 to 15 foot dirt mound. And, you know,
That would go over great and
they drive out to it and
Lanesville and
drive up
Eastern
the mound
Point.
and park in their garage, but all around them is still a flood.
It's flood. Yeah. Well, and the whole issue is, should people be building in flood zones? And that's a whole nother matter.
So where do we want to land on this one? Shall I make this one red?
40 feet.
Yeah.
No, I am fully in favor of 35. I'm sorry, Jane, I am and have been.
Yeah, make it red, Greg, and we'll bring it up with the board. But I'm actually, it's funny, the other districts are okay. I like R40 and it's fine and bigger because I think people are so far away. To Beverly's point, you won't even notice. And then R10, which is kind of What is R10?
R10 is like Wheeler's Point, Thurston Point.
Yeah.
Goose Cove area. And
So
then
that's
also,
a little denser, and in a way, the density, I don't know, makes it so that a little higher doesn't make any difference either. I don't know, maybe R10 is,
Mm. See, now it's interesting you to say that, because in an R10, you have 4 units to the acre. In an R40, you have 1 unit to the acre.
I
So I
know.
would think you would say, given you were
No.
thinking that the higher roof or the denser would be problematic. But the fact is, as we go down and our lot sizes become smaller and we start to have more 2 and 3 building, they take up more of the lot because the lot is smaller.
Yeah,
And these building types are all over the United States. It's an accepted building height. And for a 3-plex to not have 35 feet height
no,
is
yeah,
problematic,
I get it.
especially on a small lot.
Yeah,
Because remember, height and lot coverage, there's a relationship.
Yeah.
And if you have a smaller lot and a smaller lot coverage, then your building envelope has got to be made up by height.
right.
So
well, I'm just noting that we go from 25, the cutoff is at R20, and then the allowance goes to 30 and 35 for
this lot
total
coverage.
lot coverage. Yep.
And lot coverage is building coverage, right?
It
Nothing
is
more.
all structures.
All structures, but not driveways. And
Correct.
yeah, okay,
So
that's fine.
if we went to 35 feet, would we still keep footnote B, which says maximum height for buildings can be increased by special permit?
We would leave that because there's still the, we basically have to go into section
1.6. Yeah.
And remove A. So we basically would say,
Okay.
you could go to the city council for an increase above 35.
Okay.
And the point being, since there's more, it's more liberal in allowed to go above 35 should have a higher standard of approval.
Right.
And you can argue, you really can't get that into 35. We just gave you 5 feet by right, and you can't get into that. No, 36, 37 feet is not acceptable. So my sense is you probably not going, this just probably doesn't open the door to 40 foot by special right. It pretty much caps building in single family and zones to 35, pretty much.
Okay.
So good point. I will add the portion about 3.1.6. Because that would be striking that first 3.1.6A, and that would become the new, the table reference would be correct, but it would send you just there if you were going to go an increase of 35.
Greg, and the for the central business district specifically, the 35-foot height, is there a separate table for commercial structures or multi-use structures, or does it?
There are separate tables for other uses, yes.
And what are they? And what are the range for commercial, just so we get a sense of the difference between commercial and residential?
Well, my thought specifically at this point is, I know we're talking about dealing with it at some point, and hopefully sooner than later, but my thinking is for Main Street corridor, Roger Street, that in order to encourage multi-use development, commercial on the ground floor, residential up, that sooner than later, we're going to have to address even 35 feet, I think, is inadequate for significant development along Main Street or Roger Street. It just isn't enough bang for your buck, I think, if you're going to redevelop, say, the Sovereign Bank, empty Sovereign Bank property, which was on the market, I think, for $4 million. You're not going to buy a piece of property for $4 million and only put 1 floor of retail and maybe 2 floors max of residential above it. I think you need some additional height. And
Yeah,
again,
I mean,
going back to our previous study along this a Main Street corridor, especially, my recollection is that the average building height is somewhere around 45 feet already.
Which,
So-
by the way, is, again, if you go look at zoning codes across the country, modest commercial zones, not high rise, but modest, 45 is kind of standard. And you just hit it. That is 4 stories and a little bit of a roof detail, or 4 stories and flat, because commercial buildings do tend to be flat roofed and not, unless they're in a historic zone and are trying to mimic the existing buildings, which of course is true of our downtown here. But 45 would be a very, very widely accepted number that would be hard to disagree with, I would say, in terms of planning law.
Right. So my
Does
thinking,
Okay.
oh, I was just going to say, my thinking, and the reason I brought it up is I think it's an appropriate time to address that issue also. If we're doing building height and all the other zones, to actually address it now, again, sooner than later.
I was just gonna question, so CB is basically both sides of Main Street, right? And CCD is
around City Hall.
around City Hall. So I think whatever we talk about for Main Street might be the same for City Hall. And then NB is so weird. Why is it just the same as that's the whole perimeter of Gloucester Harbor, right?
No, that's MI.
Oh, what's,
NB they're basically embedded in residential districts.
They're kind of nodal
Neighborhood business.
neighborhood business.
oh,
yeah.
neighborhood business. Oh, yeah.
So it's
right.
nodal. It's
So-
nodal. It'll be like a street corner.
Okay,
It'll
got
be
it.
like an
So
intersection.
so H says it would be the same as the surrounding residential district, right?
Right.
Okay, so then what's
That's reasonable.
the area around the harbor? Oh, MI,
Marine
Um,
industrial.
Marine industrial.
right, and we don't have that here because it's not residential. Okay, never mind. So I'd be fine with a higher height for Main Street, Sean, and I wonder if we should do this, whatever we do for Main Street, we do for the CCD as well.
So the only thing I would say is the dimensional requirements for mixed use and multifamily above have other problems with them just than the height requirement. So I suppose one thing that you could do, because right now it's also 30 feet. So you
Well-
could, if we could promote anywhere where there's a height standard of 30 feet to be moved up to 35. But I think once we get into the discussion about Main Street, we'll be talking about a higher height.
That means what?
Once we get into the discussion about the CV district, which is after the train station district, there'll be other things that it probably won't quite look the same. The way the dimensional table works right now, there's other footnotes and things related to height that basically require you to increase your setback with increased height. There's a lot of things wrong with the table. Just for consistency for right now, I suppose you could just say 35 in that table, so that in the event that any multifamily application came in the short term, that would be their starting point for the allowance of height, because right now it's 30 feet. We're dealing with 1, 2, and 3 family in this table. 4 and above gets dealt with in another table, and you basically would have a standard for small multifamily, 3 family, and 1 and 2 that would be higher than multifamily. So,
Yeah.
so that's one thing that can be done as a transition before we get into the CB district and downtown zoning, where you just ratchet up to 35. Again, there are some single story. If someone's going to redevelop on Main Street right now, there is a permitting path. It's a little bit tortured, but they probably would look at a minimum of 2-story above. And again, if they're looking for that kind of retail kind of store height of 12 to 14 to 15 on the first level, they're probably going to be above 35 anyway. So,
Yeah.
but it is something that could be suggested at this time, that there's at least parity of other uses with a minimum standard of 35 feet.
If I might think too, it's a strategy thing, and it'd be fine for me if we went ahead and did that in those zones in order to create that parity. But we're going to be having quite a discussion, I think, on height and other development standards around the train station, where we're conceiving of buildings that are like, if not taller than we have on, say, Main Street. And as a result, the transition then, after getting that nailed down and having the rationale for the higher height, then you have a better case than to say, now let's look at the CBD in relationship to the new transit oriented zone. And really, what is good for the goose is good for the gander, the buildings on Main Street. You know, if we want to encourage densification, particularly if we want to encourage above grade residential, then let's look at the transit oriented discussion and apply that. I think it's easier to do that than it is to look at the 2 and 3 unit densification and say, let's apply that to Main Street. So in terms of timing and rationale, I think that might be a more natural progression.
You're saying leaving it at 35 is a more natural progression.
No, I'm saying going to 35 or 45 at a later, I mean, well, 35.
Yeah,
you
leave it
can.
alone for now.
Leave it
Yeah.
alone for now, but then you could argue for 35 even, and I think Sean's 45
Yeah.
would be an easier sell if we have had a rational conversation about that in the transit oriented zone.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah,
Then you just carry it over.
Okay.
okay.
So if that concludes, I think that's everything in that memo, which I will add the reference to 3.1.6 and clean this up to, again, have things that the subcommittee agreed to, and I'll put that in the opening paragraph, are highlighted in green, and those areas that needed further discussion with the full board in red. And I can distribute it. We'll pick our editor. I'll send that back to you, Jane, and you can take a look at it, and we'll get that to the board for discussion on next Thursday.
Oh, great.
Yep.
That'll be great.
And then I wanted to kind of circle back on our agenda. I had the second item, which we don't have to take a ton of time with, which was the framework for this Gloucester Station Overlay District. And so, Judy had provided that draft that I think, she was trying to read the room a little bit in terms of some of the discussions that we've had in the past about, we have 3 different permit granting authorities. We have a lot of special permits, and, what is the sense of, who would review these potential applications depending upon what type it is, whether it's a site plan review, whether it's a special permit application. And, what do you want this district to look like? And I think what she had provided was something that was a little bit more transitional, that had a lot of uses, less dense, less intense uses, residential being, the big one that's not allowed in GI or EV right now. And then had this kind of threshold for the special permit for, again, the mixed use project or residential project that was at a higher density. And so I think we left, and I kind of sent you a quick email, but wanted to have, everybody back in the room, virtual room, to have a discussion about if the direction is really to layer in the potential for that kind of larger, more dense project. I think the approach that we were provided was kind of a little bit of a mixed bag. You're not quite sure what the outcome is. You could have 3-family development happening, dividing up into small lots with a minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet, or does it make more sense to target, kind of a larger project with kind of incentive? We talked a little bit about what you might be able to do to infuse an affordability standard in it as well. if you provided for enough density. So I don't know where people landed on that.
Can you simplify the question for me?
Right. So I mean, it was broken down. I think what we had talked about is, envisioning the potential for 3-story at a minimum, with
Yes.
two stories of residential above some form of active use on the first floor, whether that's commercial, community use, whatever
Yes.
whatever it might be, potentially associated with the residential above or not. And if that were the case, it was really kind of the second half of the ordinance that got into that, and the first half was more kind of adding additional uses, and again, having a very small minimum lot size, so that you could see some of these kind of chunks along either Maplewood or other areas that could be divided up into 3-family units. So if this was really the approach to create a real residential district with higher density, it would really kind of be focused on more of the second half of the proposed ordinance, where you'd have a larger minimum lot size, you'd have some of these parameters of allowance of increased height as of right, and do a little bit of a back calculation of the type of density that you might be allowed. Or what you could do is just say, focus more on the form, that you're allowed to have 3-story, first floor has to be X, and a maximum height of Y, and then the density will kind of play out with some potential maximum density per unit area, which in this type of district might be, I mean, it really depends. Or you're basically saying, these are the parameters around height. You can have 2 stories, and it really lets the project kind of decide on the density, because it depends on their unit size, that type of thing. But you could put a cap on it with a maximum density per unit area.
Did I hear
Still have to refine that
I
question.
know. Did I just say here 2 choices or 3 choices? I need it.
Well,
I mean,
okay, so here's even, I'll try to narrow it down even further. There was the idea of trying to create these, the potential for density in that kind of rough district area on more of an as of right basis with site plan review or special permit, but that you wouldn't have those kind of less intense uses also allowed, because they could potentially compete with the goal of trying to create more housing in this particular district. So you'd really focus on the design standards and the density around something that would probably be a larger project, with an allowance for 3-story and maybe around something on the order of 45 feet high.
that sounds right.
Okay.
Wait, I want to know what Beverly has to say, and she just disappeared.
I think she nodded and walked away.
Cat problems.
Problems.
Beverly,
Sorry,
what-
I'm cat sitting. My husband just came, so we had to check on the second cat. Is just so hot, so they're really struggling. I was persuaded by Judy that we should look at maximum building footprint, and then allow, and I mean building envelope, which
Yep.
would be, a combination of lot coverage and height, and allow the market to decide what the density is.
Sorry.
I mean, I'm persuaded by that argument that she
Sorry, I
made.
tried to mute.
She has animal problems too. And so I mean, you can have development standards that talk about ground floor use and zero setbacks or minimum setbacks and the kind of urban design issues, but that the building footprint, I mean, the building envelope is allowed to do what the market wants it to do and not try to regulate it. So I was persuaded by her argument. Is that helpful? I didn't quite get the gist of what we're supposed to be deciding, but I was persuaded by her argument.
Yeah, I think, so I think that direction wise, there was a lot of inclusion of, and it may have been as you were whisking away. You
Yeah,
know, really
sorry.
to kind of focus more on the form. And that really comes in the second half of the draft ordinance, where you got to that kind of threshold project that all of a sudden had, you know, these other standards applied to it. And whether or not, you know, I think we can talk about the framework of review, whether it's site plan review by the planning board or a special permit. But really the design standard and kind of the formation of the district really happened in the second half of the ordinance. The first half was really more kind of chance to chance. It was 5,000 square foot lots and layered in some uses that are not permitted currently. And I think, you know, perhaps the better approach is really the second half and focusing on kind of the form of the streetscape, the height of the building, like you're saying, the kind of the standards that you would have around parking for residential units, those types of things, rather than, you know, the potential for these kind of smaller projects, you know, kind of transitional projects. So it's either like you're all in and here's what's allowed, and this is what it would look like, versus, you know, something that I think was a little bit less clear in terms of what the goal of the district would be.
Oh, there are my two choices. I'm either all in or I'm transitional.
Yes.
I'm
sure.
all
Yeah.
in.
Okay. Okay.
How
See,
about,
yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna ask you what you thought.
Well, the problem is so much of this zone around the train station is been set and it's tough. You know, what do you do with a McDonald's? You don't densify a McDonald's, you tear it down and rebuild it, right? By and large, it just doesn't suit to say, I'm going to take that McDonald's and I'm going to somehow into not only more than one story, but I'm going to move it to the sidewalk, and there's not going to be any parking in the front, and it's, you know, blah, blah, blah. So there are certain uses that are going to continue to function until they're torn down and rebuilt. And there's certain buildings that are going to transition and might be modified. And so, you know, for example, what are we going to do with Shaw's? I mean, is Shaw's going to redevelop at some point, maybe? So
Yep.
it's hard. And then you have some central parcels that are really problematic to develop in any event. You remember Joel Ferrazzo's piece. Yep. So, golly, this is a tough one. I mean, I think when you do a version of like this, the idea is, one, to give the vision in the best of all possible worlds when the area is completely developed. What is it going to look like? What are we going to achieve? And then you have to have, I'm just talking philosophically now, and then you translate that into code in some fashion. What do we do with the transitional uses? So nobody has to redevelop unless they want to. You don't drive anyone out, because that's not good policy, but that you give them some ability to transition from where they are now to where ideally they'd be if the lot were completely empty and you could start fresh. And that is really the challenge. It's how you allow property owners to transition. And it can be quite problematic. So, and that's where you get some phased development. You know, I'll do it back here. I own the land behind the McDonald's. I don't want to let go of the McDonald's now. It makes money for me, but I do want to develop to code in the back. And then eventually I'll do the front. You have to have some provision for phased development in order to get from here to there. And it's not easy. It's not easy.
Well, I think I have enough to go and have more discussions with Judy.
Sean, do you have an opinion?
I agree with the all-in comment. I think it makes sense to structure the new zoning to encourage the larger multi-use developments than to go part way to get a few more three-family houses in the neighborhood. It makes much more sense to basically make the allowances for the larger developments.
But really, won't the transition sort of happen organically and naturally rather than having to be addressed in the code?
It is, yeah. Yeah, it will be. And there'll be a point when my McDonald's is either not as viable as it once was, or the development around is so successful that I can see that I'm much better off to tear it down and start over. That's organic. That's
Right.
organic. And so you want to hope, one of the things that you might want to do to jumpstart a plan like this in an area that's pretty fully developed, although underdeveloped for all practical purposes, is to seek funding for these jumpstart projects, a project that like a demonstration project, some developer who is really ambitious with some state funding, maybe because it has affordable housing in it, in which you have a project that is the model project. And sometimes these projects are the jumpstart projects. And they're the ones that convince others, boy, this is really cool. I'd like to do something new. Now work with me to find a financially viable way for me to tear down my profit making whatever and replace it with something that's denser and more in keeping with the design standards of a transit oriented zone. So I think a really perfect, I don't know if it'll happen, a really perfect demonstration project would be the renovation or redevelopment of the grocery store. That would really be a jump starter, both because of the size of the site and because it's immediately adjacent to the station. So.
Just also noting that we do have an attendee, Bill Wheat, who's also, I think, very interested in trying to be a demonstration. So I will kind of circle back with Judy, and we'll try to get another iteration that's really going to focus kind of more on the second half a little bit. And we'll meet. I'm going to be out of town. Oh, we do have a hand. You have a hand raised. Cell phone going.
All right.
On Zoom, somebody's phone, not yours.
My dog barking still wins.
Okay, so I'll recognize.
Yeah, that's just because
Bill.
you couldn't see the cat hanging off of the screen.
Zoom challenges.
Hey, Bill, you should be able to speak.
She's
Hey,
like,
thanks, Greg. No, I was just listening in and, yeah, you know, I've got that lot behind the McDonald's car wash and the 7-Eleven there that runs parallel to the MBTA parking lot. And so, yeah, I've been, as you're aware of, I'm looking to, either build a residential project there or, some sort of, densely, affordable housing, apartment building. And, I'm open to suggestions and, I'm very kind of flexible with my plan. And so I'm just looking for some direction from the committee. So, I heard you chiming in about the Shaws, but I've got that, that acre of land that would be, I think, very, very useful. So, yeah, Now, I'm encouraged by these talks though, and would love to be able to, I guess, I don't know if there's a committee member that I could sit down with, or, kind of go over some specific plans and go that way, or I don't know if that's allowed or not.
Well, Bill, if things have changed at all, we're happy to meet again, as we have in the past. I think we're kind of on parallel tracks here, in terms of what might the outcome of this be versus what your development goals might be. So we can certainly meet again.
Okay,
I think also we're not far enough down the road on our own discussions for a committee member to meet with you, but certainly be
understood.
open to that in the future.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Greg. Can we wrap up?
I think that's probably the wrap up. So I'll get a draft out to you of what we were kind of looking at today, with the caveats in it. If you want to add anything to it, if you want it to be in your hands, your pen, you're welcome to
No.
edit.
Well, we'll see. Okay.
We'll take a look at it. I'll clean it up though, and I'll get that to you. I am going to be out of the office tomorrow and Friday. My children will be returning and leaving my house. Not that it does sadden me a bit, but I'll probably try to get this to you early tomorrow, and then you can edit and we can look at it and get it to the rest of the board next week.
So the plan is to have a discussion of the 3-family business next week at the regular first
regular
meeting of
planning board meeting.
September. And then you'll give us a date to re-meet with Judy to talk about the TOD.
Yes,
Okay,
Yep.
that's fine.
and I hope we'll give you something to digest before we do that.
Excellent.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Greg.
So a roll call motion to
Oh.
adjourn.
Oh, motion to adjourn. We didn't. Yeah. Okay. I move that we adjourn.
I second.
And a roll call vote. Member Renson,
Yes.
Member Bookin,
Yes.
and Member Henry.
Yes.
Okay. We will
Emma,
see
thanks for all
you-
your work too.
Yeah.
See you next Thursday.
No, it's not. Wait. Oh, yeah. The first
Next
is
Thursday.
the Thursday is second. Yeah. We'll see you then. Bye,
Okay.
everyone.
Bye.
Okay.
Right.
Yes, Wednesday is.